I'm not sure if you saw the description of my talk in on the website. You might have seen that this is actually, for those who follow the YouTube link on that page, you might see that this is actually the exact same slide as I started the presentation 3 years ago, or 4 years, no, it's longer actually, 5 years ago, God. And it's kind of important to have seen that, so I'll give a two-minute kind of summary of that talk, which is then also a good way to introduce myself. So this is on the left, that's me a long time ago with much more hair. And a buddy of mine called Tom, and we worked at the 15 kilometers west from here in the Netherlands Cancer Institute. As you can hear, I was also born very close by. I'm from 15 kilometers south of here. But we worked here in a research institute. This was not how we normally would dress, but you can see the lab. And what we did there as a hobby, I started programming, building apps for scientists in the biology environment. And we did that under the name Macintosh. You might have heard of that. And I'm the Mac part of that duo. And that went actually quite nicely. It started as a hobby, got a bit out of hand when we started actually winning 2 design awards, which was really cool, and it drove a lot of traffic to our site. But it all became really serious when I tried to tackle this problem, which I had myself, although this is not my desk. And I wrote this app called Papers, which was a kind of iTunes for research articles. And that also won a design award in 2007, and that really was also the first paid app I made, and that allowed me to then go as a one-man band or an indie developer. But that didn't last long because the app luckily was successful, and we grew to about 5-6 people all over the place. And that brings me to this slide, which was kind of the most important slide of the presentation from a few years ago, which is one thing that is clear out of this slide, is that it's, I think, still a ridiculous idea, this whole Google Glass, glasses that they had at the time. But this slide kind of summarizes the big problem that I ran into as an indie developer as we grew, because at some point I realized that this wouldn't scale much further in the way we were working, and either I was about to take the left road and let really Papers grow even bigger, but it would have meant starting, scaling the team, introducing hierarchies in the team, or starting an office or something like that. Or the alternative would have been to actually scale down the ambitions of Papers and take maybe a little bit more of a lifestyle road to the right. But that decision was actually made very simple, because around the same time in 2012, a publisher called Springer in the scientific world, one of the bigger publishers, showed interest in Papers, and ultimately they bought the program, and I continued there. So that basically was the whole point of that talk, is like, why did I give up my life as an indie developer? Now, as you might have known, this saved you maybe a lot of 40 minutes on watching YouTube videos. If you want to see more about why and why it made sense at the time, I urge you to have a look at that video. But basically this happened in the meantime, as you may have seen, so it obviously means that I actually made a double reverse. I became a maybe reverse indie, and I'm an indie developer again. So basically what I wanted to do is make this talk the continuation of the previous one. So effectively it would be part 2, as you wish. And it's, I think, a story that's nice to tell, a lot of anecdotes and a nice journey, but there's also, I think, some very interesting lessons there. So what happened at Springer, and why did I ultimately leave or go back to indieship, is, of course, you were no longer an indie. So the big promise, or the premise, actually, that why we sold it, or I sold it, was that they could help Papers scale to a next level. We had done everything by selling Papers to individuals that had sold it to each other, basically. But Springer had a big sales force, and they were supposed to then roll it out to universities, etc. Now, in hindsight, I was maybe a bit naive, because selling software is very different from selling books and content, what was Springer doing. So that was a bit of a mismatch. And maybe there were also already quite early on some signs, because this was actually, I was asked by HR on day one, basically to send them my pass photo for the entry pass. And so I sent them this file, and the rest of the period I ran around with this entry card, which I found so awesome that I just decided to not report it. But it said something maybe about the environment. The other reason was that, of course, very quickly also, the first year, yes, recruiting people was already back then as hard as you've seen here, because you can talk to that one and that person, that person for a job, and you have to try to get to scale a team, because we wanted to go from these 5 to a bigger team. But ultimately we got there, but it also meant that I was myself no longer a developer. We got a CTO, so it means that you cannot be the boss and the guy doing the Mac development, because he has to then tell his boss to fix a stupid bug or something. So that's difficult, and ultimately you end up being manager and having a lot of meetings and less coding, which is something I still like. So basically we got to another reason to show the same slide again, but now from a different perspective, which is that one thing that really was difficult for me was that I could see papers also change. And it had to do again with a bit the same thing as here. Imagine you go through a certain path with your application, and if you look back, when you reach some kind of corner here at the edge, you can exactly understand why you got there, right? You know why you took certain turns, and why you went this way, and why you got there. But at the same time, there's something in yourself that says, maybe if I would not walked in a group, I would have taken this other road, right? And that kind of changes the characteristics of the application and everything, and that nibbles in the back of your head as well. So one thing that happened was that in the meantime, Springer actually got merged into Springer Nature, and with that was kind of sideways came a competitor of ours, became suddenly under the same umbrella. So ultimately, I managed to convince them that that was not very wise thing to do, to have two competitors compete with each other while they're basically part of the same mother company. And so they sold papers technically to this ReadCube competitor. And the same time, I guess that's where this paper still is, so it still exists, but I think the office of the building is becoming a bit dusty, so they're trying to get a new update out, but unfortunately that it still is not out yet, and that is something that is still not very nice to watch, I have to admit. But it was time for me to leave the building, so that was in 2016 actually. Of course, but wait, that's your baby. Yeah, it's true, and it does hurt, obviously. But it's also not really the same thing, because this little fellow is now quite a bit older, but he's still very cute, and he also will be in the house hopefully for a while. Well, papers actually, in a way, if you think about it, it already became less of your, certainly less of your baby when you sell it, which I don't advise you to do with babies, but with real babies. But it's already starting to become less of your baby when you're not the only one working on it, right? You're with a group of people, and it comes back to that same which road do you pick story. And actually, one thing I realized later is that it even started earlier, because it really already starts to become less of your baby when you're moving out of the laboratory, right? Because at some point I decided to become full-time indie, and I was not really a user of my own program anymore. I fully understood it, and that helps. But ultimately, you're not the one that screams at the screen when this stupid button doesn't work anymore, or is not doing exactly what you want. So that also made a change. So what was next then? This was January 2016. And what was interesting is it comes back to a way of how I worked, and already since a very long time ago. So this was a to-do file that I still have from 4 Peaks, one of those very early applications that I showed you. And basically the way I worked was just having a text edit file, and I would just put stuff in there. And basically the way it works with such a file is that if something is important, you paste it at the top of the file, and if it's less important, you hope to get there one day, you'll do it at the bottom of the file, and kind of naturally the most important stuff is more or less at the top. Of course, you can't find anything anymore, and it's all different formatting and all, it's a mess, but it gets you quite far. I had various ones of these, one for 4peaks, one for NSMX, one for papers, and then started to grow, and at some point somebody told me, why don't you use Simple Note, because it's kind of the same thing, but at least all your files are here, and you know that you don't have 20 text edit documents open. So okay, that I used, and I liked it, and as certainly an environment within that publisher, I started kind of developing my own way of keeping track of things when you got meetings and stuff, and that kind of worked like this. So you kind of write in the text edit file some of the stuff you need to talk about in the weekly meeting that we would have with the management team or the people, and I kind of always put there on the top like next time. But when the meeting would happen, I would just replace that with the date of the meeting. Okay, fine. Then as the week progresses, you start again adding some more stuff at the top of that document, and that's kind of automatically the agenda for the next time you have that meeting. So you just write the date there again, and there you go. And that way, you always have this kind of, I started calling it the next box, basically some place where you can always capture these things that you need to talk the next time. Because I saw other people also needed that, because I would have somebody, I would have a weekly meeting with that would talk an hour about Swift, the newest thing in Swift during the meeting that we were scheduled to have, and then in the same evening would get an email this long with everything that was wrong in the world, and of course, you're like, why didn't we actually talk during our meeting about this? And a lot of people have that because they come to the meeting in a hurry, and they're like, what is it to talk about? Nothing. And then what all they would have had to do was just keep during the week this schedule, right? So I figured somebody could, first I started doing it a lot, and figured I could use this methodology in the form of an app, and I think many others could use the same thing. Now, I did this in text edit. So what is interesting, actually, is that what I was doing was basically, this was a combination of 4 things, almost 4 apps, right? I was obviously keeping notes, but I was also associating it with calendar dates, and I would do their stuff. I would keep track of things that I would have to do, but automatically it would also kind of start forming some kind of journal from all the last times we had meetings. So it was very interesting that there was this kind of space in between. And the other thing is that it's kind of interesting that you have kind of a fluent transition from future, like this is what I'm going to do. You saw I wrote it in the next box, the next meeting, and kind of very fluently it became kind of a past, so kind of a track. So what was kind of weird to me was that this is all kind of in separate apps. Right? Why would I do a to-do list in Things or in Reminders, and then have a different app that is not connected to it, where I can look at my past in a journal app? And the same was kind of true with notes and events. You wouldn't put all your notes in the note element of the calendar app, but at the same time, notes, every time you would touch one note in the Notes app, it would just rearrange it to the top because you had most recently edited it, which was destroying your history. So I figured what was interesting as well is that there is kind of an equivalent in the real world that is kind of this thing, which is basically a pocket agenda, right? So, and the word agenda was for a long time already something that we thought about. And one other thing that I was really intrigued by was that when I once did a search for the domain name agenda.com, it turned out it was actually for sale. So a lot of people ask me, wow, agenda was free? Well, it was certainly not free, but it was available, right? So, and that was interesting because it meant to me that it was like, does this mean that there indeed actually is a gap in the market? Or, of course, you could also argue maybe there is no gap in the market because the other guys are overlapping too much. But still, that intrigued me about the name. The other thing is that what I then usually do is go back to my age-old philosophy, which is at least there is one user, because I needed that app, and I could see some others around me could potentially use it. So that was, I think, a good sign. Of course, there was this thing where you're like, well, there are some other note-taking apps already. So why are you going for a note-taking app? And what I decided to do was, usually once or twice a year, I would meet up with a good friend of mine that I already knew from a very long time. Here you see him. You might not recognize him anymore. And he is not, he's actually never been the developer of at Sofa, just to be clear. But I met him at various WWDCs, and we would regularly meet up when I would be in Holland, and just discuss how things were going. And once I remember he said, like, maybe once you have done it, when you're done at Springer, maybe we could do something together. And that was kind of in the back of my head. And of course, you're still like, is this a good idea? So I decided, you know what, I'm going to tell Drew and actually say, you know, what do you think, as a kind of testing the waters. And maybe if he's really excited, I can even propose that we do it together. And well, he didn't find it a crazy idea. And he said yes, so let's do this together. So actually, we decided to start this project called Agenda. The name came later because actually we started by creating a company called Momenta BV, which was obviously the name we also had in mind for a while. Now I hear you say, but wait, you wanted to go back to being alone, and now you're going to start again with somebody else. And yeah, that's absolutely true, but I think it's one of the best decisions that I made, because it makes a world of difference if you have somebody else that you can bounce your ideas off, or that, you know, where you can share both the frustrations when something goes wrong, but also, of course, the successes when something goes right. It's nice that you can share that with some people, and that you're really close with. And we have this group of people together with Marcello, everybody here on the corner, basically, that we have just a brilliant way of working with, and that is just really nice as a group. But we're still very independent. We have kind of our own sections of the code where you can just feel free. You know, there's so little overhead, and we're just so productive because you can, you know, just trust each other to do the right thing. And it's very different from this kind of design by committee environment. So after a full year of working, we kind of built this first alphas, and what you can see here is that actually it's a really close translation of what I just showed you in TextEdit. So you have these boxes with the next box, and the yellow ones are basically in the future, and you can capture your ideas in these boxes, right? And then when you would have had a meeting, you press the button, and it would automatically get the name, because of course now it's a bit smarter than TextEdit. I have no clue why everything is bold. Apparently back then already not. But you get this same kind of boxed history of your past. The yellow ones are the future. You can reorder them, and if you do so, but you cannot put them into the past. And likewise, there is this sort of enforced date order. And if you would create a new, put the next box down, say, and you would make a specific for, say, the WWDC, then automatically a new next box would be created. So a lot more stuff than you could do in TextEdit. It's now a bit smarter, because that was the whole purpose of making an app. So it looked after a while it looked like this. Then we went to Marcello and said, don't change too much, but make it look a little bit nicer. And so it started to form and become a real app. We made some you know, kind of in-app sample documents and things. And this was it. And we're like, okay, 1 year of work, really hard, let's give this a try. And so how do we do that? We'll just, of course, send it to the friends, families, and fools very close by, just to basically trust some people you really trust, that you feel, okay, tell us what you think, that you trust to also tell you what they think. And yeah, sometimes that's a bit hard. So this was the reaction of a certain conference organizer that actually did the conference that I was at, so you might know this person. And he basically said, well, this feels like something I would like to use, but I'm not sure why or how. And so after a year of work, that's, yeah, and then you're back with 2 legs on this planet. And it was kind of one of the nicer ones that we got. So that's hard. And so I remember well that we got the feedback basically on Thursday, Friday, and you start thinking, and more or less at the same time actually Things 3 came out, and it had this really nice look, very clean. And one of the things that made me think of is like, okay, wait, I tried to replicate this in the form of an app, and why did we go from this to that with boxes and things? And because that was especially the part that people didn't get, because if you don't get the methodology, you don't understand why things can't be moved and why it has to be in a box. And also, if you notice actually that you could no longer write outside the box, right? So we have here an area where I just happened to dump some notes, but of course in that and other environment, that would already not be possible anymore. So we also figured out that it was just too complex, too much exactly my way of working, and also, it had to just be simpler. It has to also be able to use it as a really nice note-taking app without having to worry about dates and stuff. So we actually made a mock-up on Friday, and what happened was actually one of the most kind of still remarkable things that happened in the whole agenda story. I think that we discussed it on Friday. I made this kind of idea mock-up on in the weekend, and on Monday at 9 or something, we decided to go over all that feedback. We had a really long Skype call, I recall, but the conclusion was clear that we had to simplify. And basically, the same evening, I started on that UI refactor. The first thing we did was, to already make it simpler, get rid of a bunch of stuff, and then also get rid of those boxes again. Finally, basically, this was the same evening at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the night. And you now already start to see, for those who know Agenda, that this is very close to the actual app. And actually, in 3 weeks later, the app looked pretty much the way it looks today. Because functionally, nothing had changed. It was just really much the look of things. So Drew sent this nice email saying like, well, after the first alpha release of our new app, we got some very good feedback from a number of testers. When we say very good, we are referring to the quality of the feedback. What was said was actually pretty bad. And that was, we were honest there, and luckily the feedback was much, much better. So that was the first time I think where we thought like this can actually work, this app. But there were still these questions coming up over the course of feedback, like, okay, but what do I need it really for? Or why is this better than all the other stuff out there? And is it really for me? And some other people said, like, but I'm not sure exactly how to organize myself and how I should be doing it. And of course, naturally, you would say, okay, the first part is something that you would really want to try to explain on your website predominantly, because you first have to make people download the app. And then secondly, okay, in the app, you want to assist the user to guide to certain things. But these testers, for example, had just been told by friends, literally, go and download this app and look at it. So a lot of people might never see your website, right? And so how can they then feel that the app is for me? And that's one of these things that we've done in the very early papers release. I realized we had tackled this just by showing it in the app. I'll show you the video of what that looked like. So I love this movie because it's kind of almost like a time capsule. I think most of you will recognize GarageBand's standard songs. It's a little bit tacky with a nice little Keynote translation. It was just made in Keynote, this movie. But what it does, it was a new app at the time as well. Everybody knew reference managers, but nobody PDF live managers. And So a lot of people had this question like, well, why would I use this app? And I figured, if you just present the problem and this is what your problem is, and people, yeah, that's my problem, and this is the app that's going to solve it, then okay, this is what the app's going to solve. And what had happened actually was that when we launched Papers 2, this is what you would see. And you see that we still say your personal library of research, but we actually don't really say much about what this problem is that we save. I mean, basically we're a bit first under time pressure, but also there was a bit this feeling, isn't it a bit, you know, the music, the transition, is it a bit too cheesy and stuff? So, you know, certainly when you go in a group, there'll always say somebody, yeah, it's too cheesy. So, okay, let's get rid of it, right? And actually in Papers 3, you'll see that although, you know, it became maybe nicer design, it's even more sterile. You know, it's even less. It's just, this is your library of research. What is that? A library of research, right? So you see this kind of theme where you go towards, okay, let's make it cleaner, let's make it simpler. And that's not great, because what we needed to do was we needed to explain people this in 1 minute. Why do you need this app in the middle, right? Or less, 20 seconds ideally. And that's just really not easy. And a long time, we were just in the back of our head, the project is going to success or fail depending on whether we can explain that. Okay, but in the meantime, Marcello started working on an icon. You saw with Papers, that little house is always very important. So he came very quickly up with this idea of a pencil tip with note-taking, while also having an A in there. And this was kind of very close to the final icon, which I think looks great, and it's nice visually and strong icon. And then I asked him at some point, can you make a placeholder for when there is no notes in a project, for instance? And he came up first with this, ignore the text that is impossible to understand, but the first instruction you get when you launch the app, we changed that. And it's okay, but this is when it becomes really great if you work with, you know, basically a brilliant designer that say, hey guys, I've got something to show. I took the element from the app, which is this button, right, this orange button. Orange is obviously the color of Agenda, as you by now have seen. And he came up with this, which was great. It's like a little scene where the pencil tips formed an island, and the sun, this dot from the plus button, would become the dot of the sun. And then you get this feeling, that's awesome. And hey, you know, maybe we should do something where, depending on the time of the day, you actually have a different sun. And then, of course, you play a little bit longer, and well, that's what you do. If you search and there's no notes, depending on the hour of the day, you actually get a different scene. And actually, I went a little bit further and say, well, you know, let's see, because based on the date, you can actually determine what the full moon is. It's not astronomically correct, but you basically get a nice, you know, some nice scene there. But what was really interesting was that I got back to this question: how do you explain this? And I realized something, that these are kind of nice opposites, and you almost start thinking about this, and who sees this icon might already see something here, that it's kind of, you know, it's two balances, and if you want to present this, you're going to always talk about notes versus events, and future versus past, right? So it somehow visually reminded me of that cycle that we've just done. So I basically made it a cycle, and this is now how we explain the app, and you might have seen it on the website as well. So. So Actually, it's very similar to that paper's first run, if you think about it, right? So that's immediately tells, okay, this is what this app is all about, and also this is what the other apps can't offer you, right? So this is why you should use it. And yes, for those who are asking, that is actually also GarageBand, but now I didn't pick the stack, the stock sound. So that left another question, which is how you use the app, and for then, okay, you know, that we do with this nice introduction showing what, you know, what the various parts of the app is, you know, how you kind of quickly get started. But what's also interesting, we were kind of from the start convinced we needed some kind of sample documents inside the app, and just to see how you can then practically then also see it, and it's nice that you can at the end say, hey, do you want to have these sample documents and play a little bit with it? And we had this idea of like, yeah, the sample documents are like, meh. So, you know, like, let's make them a bit interesting. And one point we were thinking maybe we should ask Matt Gamble, you know, to make these, to write something for us. Have really have a writer do something interesting. But he was too busy with his new book, and Drew at some point said, I'll just give it a try. And he actually did a really fun, great job with this sample document, which is about some kind of fictitious startup that you know, that is doing all kinds of things with basically, well, look at the T-shirts of the guys that are around. But so we made this really interesting story, and then you kind of get oh, but you know, that would be fun, because then actually, you know, there's another sample document where we actually go to that island, you know, that from the intro, and we started changing the names to the right things, but even you know, like, okay, let's make those dates match up, so it's actually a different person from the same story has written this one, and actually, if you look at the dates, they even it complement the story, etc. We went maybe a bit too far in first iteration because it was a bit dark, so you know, it actually was about disappearance, and actually the very first iteration, it was actually saying meeting about Tom's death, and at that time, the sample document, we could only sort them in like how I showed you in the beginning. So the newest on the top. So basically, Tom's death was at the top, and it was also one of the first things you would see. And I remember very specifically that my wife became really angry because she was like, "What is this?" You know. Anyway, so we toned things down as well, because it's never the intention to have it that distracting or offend anybody, but. What does happen is that if you then look at, you know, this was the product hunt page of the launch, that you started seeing this, you know, people saying like, hey, this is worth a download alone just for the sample code, the poor guy. And, you know, like on Twitter as well, you know, you should just download it. And actually we got even so far as people asking like, if you now launch the iOS version, are you going to have a new story? You know, it's like, so, and I think that's really interesting, because in medicine, basically, you have this, we all know side effects, right? And I would call it side effects. It's an effect, you know, in medicine, a side effect is an effect that is secondary to the one you intend. And most of us, it also says this, although the term is usually used to describe adverse effects, right? That's how we usually know them. It can also apply to the beneficial but unintended consequences. And I think that's exactly what's going on here with these kind of things you put in the app. It has all kinds of side effects. And I'll show you another one that was actually in Papers. So this was the Papers window, and we actually had a forum inside of the app, directly accessible from the app. And ultimately, you had to shut it down because you know, there was like spammers. The forum software was really good, but you also it takes very few to basically screw up a very nice environment, right? So. And if you don't have the tools to handle with them, ultimately it didn't scale as Papers grew to larger audiences. But I felt that we had, again, lost that with Papers 2 and 3, and I felt it was important, certainly when you begin with an app. And so I found it so important that you know, I kind of pushed towards, we need to put this right there, always in the top right corner. So it's there, and you go inside the app to the forum, and it has, you know, it's a good way. The predominant thinking is, of course, this kind of where you go for help and instruction, so basically kind of in the support area. But it has, and actually it was also funny, this Gus Muller wrote this, he said it's a new app, it looks nice, great domain name, but it also has a forum in there, and I can't decide if this is insane or brilliant, because that was one of your scares, right? You've got this huge thing to also maintain. But I think it worked out really well. And more importantly, you get all these side effects. You get less support. We have the manual is in that. I mean, the how-to area is your manual. And if there's mistakes in there or missing things or anything, people point it out. The people ask questions in there at the bottom of that manual page, basically, and you understand immediately, okay, this area of my manual is not great. You get promotion and marketing opportunities out of it. A lot of people that offer help, like translations, and even people asking, you know, I want to work with you guys or whatever, right? So it's a very direct way to interact with your audience. It also helps a lot to be transparent. You know, what can you expect from us? And that's because we tell you what if you ask us a question, right? And it basically helps with just really getting also good reviews. This guy that says the dev seems to be quite supportive of their program and user input because they see you answering questions, saying that you're going to do things. So it tells them, okay, these guys are serious, right? This is not abandonware. So that's a benefit, but also, I think very importantly, people don't feel alone. If you just started an app, if you're excited about it, you might have this feeling of like, am I the only crazy one that likes this app, right? And here you see a lot of people liking the app because they tell that. And so you're like, oh, you will feel more comfortable spreading the word. And also, importantly, you feel more using the app, but also in buying your app because you see other people buying it, right? So I think that has a mental effect on whether you decide to buy it or not as well. And speaking of buying, we had a long discussion and long thoughts about what we should do here, because this is an area that has changed a lot compared to papers, which was trialware, right? After 30 days, you kicked them out because they didn't pay, basically. So we wanted recurring revenues, but not subscriptions. Apple wants you to be on subscriptions. Everybody needs subscriptions, but as a user, I personally, and Drew as well, we were really like, we don't like it ourselves, so are we going to ask other people to sign up for subscription number 40, for tool number 40, right? So, we looked for something that was based on features, but also not get into these major upgrade cycles. Ideally a free app so that everybody can try it, but we need to live. And also if you stop paying, do you want to then have people still on version 1 while we are at version 16? That's also not great. And it needed to be compatible with the Mac App Store, but not put all our eggs in their basket. And be transparent about what you paid for. So we had a lot of discussion, a lot of ideas, and ultimately we came with this cash cow model. The name is explained in this article from Drew. If you want to read exactly about how we got there in a much more detail. But basically it works like this. You have a free app with features that you can buy. It's shown to you. And in the app, there are areas or features that are marked as premium. And if you click on that and when you don't have them, we basically explain what it does. And you also see it while you use the app. You see, for instance, here, if you go to the note menu, it has one item that you don't have. So that's to entice you to check it out and to be known that you get there. You can get them. And if you click there, then we have an overview of the premium features. And most important is, if you buy them, then you basically get not only those features, but also any of those premium features, basically the locked ones, that you have, that we will ship in the next 12 months. And if the idea is, it makes it very clear what you pay for. If you pay us, we'll build stuff for you, right? That's the philosophy. So if you pay us, that helps us in the next 12 months to build stuff, and you benefit from that. And also, very importantly, once you have them, you keep them. We don't take them away from you. So you can at any point say, I will stop paying, and that's it. I like the app as it is right now, and then forever you can use it as it is right now. Of course, if we hope that you see another one coming by that you want to have, and then do another 12 months. That was, I think, a big gamble, because we had to build stuff for it and everything, but it worked out really well, and it's coming up in a lot of reviews. And also, I think we would never have been featured as much as we did during launch, because we now had two interesting things about this new app. Not only is it an interesting new app, but it also has this interesting new payment model. So it gave us also a lot of visibility. If you have read this last one, I'll show you that the last one says that he likes it, he buys it, and then that was even before he found out that the app plays a little music. And I'll show you that, what the end workflow over the end user flow is. So again, taking that same concept of the island, what if you buy it and you actually become part of that community on that island? Would they like that? And I think they, apparently they do. And again, importantly, this is making people excited, and this is people spreading the word for you, right? So that's why you do it, right? And that's why you do it. Not really, actually, because we built this with all these things in mind about the business model, what we found fair, etc., etc. So again, it's very important that you have this gut feeling of, okay, this is what we should do, and you make those decisions based on the big ones. But there's a lot of side effects often that you don't take, that you would never have thought of, or certainly don't take along in your decision making. Like everything, we have spammers on the forum. Let's quit the forum. Okay, look at what all these side effects are gone, right? And I think a lot of the times you have to. That is ultimately what also made I realize the difference with papers. That we made a lot of those decisions. We lost a lot of the side effects, and in the end, those side effects, it made me feel that that's the stuff that we had lost over time. So I think that was, it's important to think about it. Now, so that brings a lot of theory. Okay, this is what we lost, this is what we lost, and this is what we're going to do with agenda. And obviously, then is that true? And that's kind of, then the scientist comes back. We have this hypothesis that this matters when it comes to building good software. Is that true? And of course, this is why it was totally awesome to win the design award with agenda, because that's confirmation aside, obviously, from the reactions of the users, that yes, this is the stuff that ultimately, adds the little bit of magic to the app. And I think that was why this one specifically, when you completely reset and start a new project in a new time of app stores and stuff that was not there with papers, for me that made this obviously the nicest ADA that I won. So back to indie, this final bit. So we're back to square one. I'm an indie again, together with Drew, Marcello, and Charles, and has nothing changed then, compared to the old days? Of course, a lot has changed. I mean, I think it's about things like you as a developer having grown, even my GarageBand skills have grown, that makes a difference. When I talked about snapshot testing, I was thinking back to 4 peaks when snapshot testing, when I say source control was basically just duplicating your 4 peak source code folder. We don't do that anymore, and a lot of those practices have obviously come from the time that you had to work with a group of 20 people on the same code base. It does make an impact on how you work. But definitely, recognizing that you need empathy in your app if you want to make it successful and give it some character, being willing to say, I'd rather have 9 excited people and 1 that's really pissed off than saying everybody is really happy, because that is not creating the type of people that write things on Twitter, or you need to make those decisions. Being much more conscious about being independent and small versus a big team, growing the app because it's going so well, like with papers, right? So no, we are not hiring. You could talk to anybody else, but no, that's kidding. But no, we're making very consciously decision, are we going to do certain things? Because we can only do it well if we then need to grow the team, or do we want to be a bigger team? That's, I think, something that it comes back to this. It's like papers grew very organically, right? It's very, there's a guy, he likes it, come in, let's do this, but not thinking about the long-term consequences. But also building things in this kind of, he shows us the mock-up, hey, now we can do, why don't we do this, so why don't we do that, okay, this kind of cycle, instead of saying, here's the specification, can you build it, hey, this doesn't look like my mock-up, right? I mean, that is not how we work, but at the same time, being very conscious that you need to ship this thing in the end, right? You cannot just spend, no, the moon is not, that's not how the moon looks like when it's full moon, It's not how it accurately is, but that's where we stop, basically. That's when you say, no, we also need to ship this thing. it's an evening, and then and it helps that you are with two people, because I cannot come there to Drew the next day saying like, oh guys, I spent another 4 days on this moon thing, and that helps. Then that helps you keep yourself in check. All right, and I think being transparent when it comes to dealing on the forum, being just honest, saying like, this is what we're going to do next. That's what we'd like to do, but it's not going to happen next month. That management of expectations we do better. But most of all, I think what's really nice and what really is one of the key successes with Agenda is that we're all using it ourselves. And that's what I had lost as well with papers, right? So if there is, if I type something and the thing jumps up, then the next day Drew knows that the thing jumps up, right? So that's it. That was it. Thank you. I hope there are some things that you can take along and apply as well.